What does that look like? That's a mammoth of an ask. But I think we got it just right with Jcash. And I'm really excited to talk to you about Jcash. We really think it's something else. So anyone can just create tokenized fiat currencies. That's the easy part. Creating tokens is pretty easy, as we've seen over the last 2 years. The harder part is managing that system. So when people talk about, yes, cryptocurrencies can bank the unbanked, 4.4 billion people don't have access to a smartphone. So how are you planning to solve that with cryptocurrencies? Well, we have a dumb phone module, which allows you to access your Jcash from any device. We're reinventing the term any device. A dumb phone, a landline, you can access your wallet via SMS. The micropayments module, allowing for small and large volumes to be transacted, allowing for microinsurance and micro fees. And the financial reporting module brings it all together in a coherent way so that enterprise users can start tracking Jcash just like they track regular currencies. We have smart regulation, monitoring and enforcement, global payments. We also have state channels and trusted parties to solve scalability. Data Oracle modules that my co-founder Talal touched on, and the security and recovery module, which I'm really excited about. Because today, using cryptocurrencies, if you send 10 Bitcoin to the wrong wallet, what do? That's that. You hold your head in your hands and you accept your fate. Yet, if I transfer cash into someone's bank account, even if it's the wrong bank account, there's a clear plan to recover those funds. There is an actionable step and methodology to recover my funds. And it may take me an hour and a half on the phone, and it may be quite irritating and frustrating, but at the end of that, I recover my cash. So that's why I'm really excited about the security and recovery module. So what next? Well, it's our responsibility as the crypto community to not be at ends with governments and regulators and individuals, but it's our responsibility to empower them with technology and infrastructure to build the financial networks of the future. So what's next for Jibrel and Jcash? Well, I'm quite honored and humbled to let you know that we're pleased to announce our partnership with the Maktoum family in the United Arab Emirates to develop and pilot Jcash. So we'll be rolling out Jcash today with licensed financial entities, governments, and regulators. So Jcash is available today to licensed entities. And it's a massive, massive step for us, and I'm very proud of our team and the efforts we've done to release it, and I can't wait to share more with you over the course of the next coming weeks. Thank you so much. We have a great speaker up next, and I'm sure he requires no introduction, and I'll let you get to it.
네, 감사합니다. 이제 강연으로서는 마지막 강연이 되겠습니다. 참 오래 기다리셨는데요. 오늘 포럼 타이틀인 블록체인 혁명 저자로 유명하신 분이죠. 블록체인 산업에서 전 세계적으로 존경을 받고 계신 탭스코 그룹의 돈 탭스코 회장님이 준비하고 계십니다. 블록체인 혁명 주제로 강연을 시작하겠습니다. 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 잠시 양해 말씀 드리겠습니다. 현재 지금 돈 탭스코 회장님께서 강의 준비를 하시고 계십니다. 그래서 5분 정도 브레이크 타임을 갖겠습니다. 잠시만 휴식하여 주시기 바라겠습니다. 감사합니다. 네, 4층에서 기자 간담회가 약간 길어지면서 이 강연의 차질을 빚었습니다. 다시 한번 양해해 주셔서 감사하다는 말씀 드리면서요. 다시 한번 소개해 드리겠습니다. 예, 탭스코 그룹의 돈 탭스코 회장님 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바라겠습니다.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to congratulate you on the brilliant title for this conference, Blockchain Revolution. It's a very good title. Seriously. And then I have to apologize to you because I was just told that the Korean version of Blockchain Revolution is not available anywhere, and my publisher hasn't printed enough. So if my publisher is in the room, I would like to talk to you at the end of this session, and hopefully we'll have lots printed. This is a time of great opportunity. It's also a time of great danger, where big mistakes can be made in countries that can affect your future for generations. And what I'd like to do today is to talk to you about what is this blockchain revolution and how it's at the heart of the traditional economy and the transformation of our business models and our economic activity. And the miracle on the Hun that took place in Korea, if you do the right thing, you're positioned to have a second miracle. A miracle that can bring prosperity, good government, and social harmony. We're entering into the fourth industrial age. First was steam, and we mechanized things like shovels and hoes and looms. The second was electricity, and the main impact was to create the industrial production line, mass production. The third was the computer, mainframes, minis, PCs, the internet, the web, social media, the cloud, big data. And now we're entering into a fourth where technology is infusing itself into everything, into our physical world, into our bodies, into every business process, and into our organizations. And we have extraordinary developments like technologies that do things that they weren't programmed to do because they're able to learn as machines and reprogram themselves. The underlying technology for all of these great innovations, and probably the most important, is the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum. It's called blockchain. And I'm convinced that this is nothing less than the second era of the internet. And that's the right way to think about it. So let me describe that. The first era was the internet of information. But when I send you some information, a PDF, a PowerPoint, an email, I keep the original. I'm sending you a copy. Even with a website, I retain the original. And that's great for information. But when it comes to things that really matter to the economy in Korea, assets, things of value that belong to somebody, things like money or stocks or bonds or loyalty points or coupons, intellectual property, cultural assets like art or music, votes, it's an asset, it's something of value that belongs to somebody, carbon credits, even our identities. Sending a copy of those is a terrible idea. You don't want someone copying your identity or your vote. And if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money. and that I can't send it to somebody else again. Now, cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for a long time. And the way that we manage this in our economies is through large intermediaries, banks, governments, credit card companies, social media companies. They perform all of the business and transaction logic of every type of commerce. They identify the party, you are who you are. They identify that's an asset, that's a stock or a unit of currency. They clear and settle transactions, and they keep records. And overall, they've done a pretty good job. But there are growing problems, and we began to notice this in 2008. Every year, the Sibos Convention is held, and this is the biggest convention of bankers in the world, 10,000 bankers. And in 2008, Sibos was held in Vienna, and I gave the closing speech. And this was in September, and it was 2 days after Lehman Brothers had fell, and the whole banking system was collapsing. So I threw away my PowerPoint, and I gave a speech about what I thought was wrong with the banking system. Now, back then, we didn't really have any big solutions. But today we do. Think about just the banks as intermediaries. Overall, they've done a pretty good job, but there are growing challenges. They're centralized. That means that they can be hacked. And JP Morgan, Home Depot, even the CIA found that out the hard way. They exclude 2 billion people from the global economy. They slow things down. It takes a second for an email to go from Seoul to Toronto, but it can take days or even weeks for assets and computers to move up Wall Street. They charge too much. When someone in the Korean diaspora in Toronto sends money to their parents in Seoul, they can be charged up to 20%. Have you ever heard of cross-border email charges? No. And the biggest problem is that we create this new asset class called data. This is the new oil. We create it, but they get to keep it. And the end result has been that the benefits of the digital age are asymmetrical, and that we have a tiny handful of people and companies acquiring most of the wealth. We have growing economies and declining prosperity. So, what if there were not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast, global, distributed ledger, where anything of value from money to stocks to votes to music could be managed, transacted, and stored in a secure manner. What if there were a native digital medium for value? Well, in 2008, perhaps propitiously, an anonymous person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto created a paper outlining a protocol for a new kind of digital cash called Bitcoin. And anyone who's read that paper, the top of your head is probably blown off, because Satoshi solved the double spend problem. And he enabled people to transact peer-to-peer. And trust is not achieved by an intermediary, but by cryptography, by collaboration, and by some clever code. Which is why my son Alex and I call it the trust protocol. Trust is native to the technology. Now, at this point, many of you are wondering, well, how is that possible? How can that work? And I know many of you are sophisticated in this room as well, but let me just take a minute. The American author Mark Twain wrote a letter to a friend, and he said, "I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." Well, I'm going to explain to you how this works in 3 minutes. And it's taken me 5 years to be able to say this in 3 minutes. How does a blockchain work? Well, let me use the example of Bitcoin, because it was the first one, but there are many others. When I send you that $1,000, it's broadcast out to a global network of millions of computers, all using the highest level of cryptography. And then all around the world is a group of people called miners. And they have vast computing power, estimated to be 20 to 50 times bigger than all of Google's servers in the world. And these miners do a lot of work to find out the truth. And every 10 minutes, kind of like the heartbeat of a network, a block gets created. And that contains all of the transactions from the last 10 minutes. And the miners use their computing power to validate the block. And the first miner to achieve consensus is paid some of the cryptocurrency from that blockchain, in this case, Bitcoin. And then, here's the important part, that block is connected to the previous block and the previous block to create a chain of blocks. So if I wanted to hack that block and send that $1,000, the same money to you, to you, to you, and to you, to commit fraud, I'd have to hack that block plus the previous block and the entire history of commerce on that blockchain. Not just on one computer, but across millions of computers all around the world simultaneously, while the most powerful computing resource in the world is watching me. Now, I won't say that that's unhackable, but it's a lot more secure than the computer systems that we have today. The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is something that's highly processed. Sort of like a chicken McNugget. You have chicken McNuggets here in Seoul, right? These little processed bits of chicken. To hack that blockchain would be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that. But for the next period in human history, that's going to be very difficult. So that's how they work. Now, there are different mechanisms for achieving consensus and the truth. And there are many different blockchains. Hyperledger is a tool for building permissioned blockchains, where you know everyone who's using the blockchain, driven by the Linux Foundation and by IBM. Ethereum, developed by a 21-year-old Canadian, Vitalik Buterin, is a very interesting blockchain because unlike Bitcoin that has a single function, a currency, Ethereum enables the development of any application. So think of Bitcoin as email. Email was the first big app of the internet. And Bitcoin was the first big app of blockchain. But now, we have tools like Ethereum that look more like the World Wide Web. And on Ethereum, you can build smart contracts. Just like what it sounds like. Contracts that self-execute and self-police. Sort of like a contract, and inside the contract is a bank and a lawyer and a government. Quorum is a private implementation of Ethereum by J.P. Morgan. We have R3, a consortium of the big banks and others that are building permissioned ledgers for the financial services industry. Ripple, that now says it can do transaction volumes similar to Visa, is out to displace the global payment system centered on SWIFT. Then we have extraordinary new developments like Cosmos, the Internet of blockchains. Cosmos, it uses, rather than miners, it has a technology that's called Byzantine fault tolerance to enable consensus to be achieved on the platform. It's a company that has great potential. Now, full disclosure here, every day I have 2 emails from someone who wants me to be an advisor to their company in this space or to be part of their ICO. And I say no to all of them. I just have a handful of companies, and 2 of them are based in Korea. It's interesting, or have a big Korean play. One is Icon, which is an extraordinary company, is doing very well here. And the other is the Jibrel Network that I'm going to talk about later on. Now, I'm associated with the network, so I'm biased, but to me that's not a problem, it's a benefit, because it's evidence of the fact that I think very highly of that operation. So the hype machine has begun. The Economist called blockchain the trust machine in a cover story, the great chain of being sure about things. And people say, well, Don, there's so much hype. And I'm like, yeah, there's so much hype. Look at the hype. That's how much hype there is. And it's going to get a lot bigger. You know, in 1994, I wrote the first bestseller about the web. It's called The Digital Economy. And people said, Don, there's so much hype. And there was a lot of hype in 1994. Today, we talk about the internet even more than we did in 1994. So don't be confused by the hype. It's reflective of the fact that there's something very big that's happening here. So 4 years ago, I began a wonderful collaboration with my son Alex, and we wrote the book, Blockchain Revolution. And I'm very proud to say that this is the #1 bestseller in the world on the topic of blockchain. And it's a very good book. And I'd like to apologize to all of you that you can't buy it in Korean, but we're working on fixing that. So for the rest of my talk, I'd like to share some of the insights from the book, but also from the work that we're doing at the Blockchain Research Institute. This is a global institute. It's centered in Toronto, and we're conducting 75 projects about the strategic impact of blockchain on business and on government. And we have many of the world's leading thinkers that are collaborating with us and are running these projects. So let's begin by talking about the corporation. The corporation is part of the real economy and the traditional economy. The corporation was actually enabled by double entry accounting hundreds of years ago. But as we move towards triple entry accounting, where you not only have a debit and a credit, but a third entry on a blockchain, the corporation is beginning to change profoundly. And 80 years ago, there was a Nobel Prize-winning economist named Ronald Coase, and he posed a deceptively simple question. He said, why do we have the corporation? Why do we have the firm? He said, if Adam Smith is right, and the open market is the best mechanism for allocating goods, resources, information, money, why isn't everybody an independent contractor at every step along the way in production? Why do we all work for a firm? And he said the answer is, and he won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is transaction costs. And he talked about 4 classes of costs. First of all, the cost of search. Imagine trying to find all the right people to do something, the right information, the right money, the right assets in an open market. Every time you tried to do something, Well, that would be prohibitive. So we bring search inside the boundaries of a firm, where we have filing cabinets to find information, and org charts to find people, and a corporate treasurer to find money, and so on. Secondly, he said, the cost of coordination. Imagine trying to get all these people in an open market to work together to create a car. That'd be prohibitive. So we bring that inside the boundaries of a firm where we have management structures and processes to coordinate. Number 3 was the cost of contracting. If every little activity in the economy required a contract, a doctor's going to perform surgery, he'd have or she'd have to do 80 contracts with suppliers of equipment and scalpels and medicines and nurses and so on. Prohibitive. And finally, the cost of establishing trust. We bring all of these inside the boundaries of a firm where we can trust each other. Well, all of these costs are about to be devastated, blown to smithereens by blockchain, because that's what this technology does. It radically drops transaction costs and enables people to collaborate together in trusting ways. So the first industrial age, really, we had corporations that were vertically integrated. And then we saw the rise of information technology and in the 1980s and 90s, and we saw the rise of what I called an extended enterprise. Then, with the Internet of Information, companies began to unbundle into networks. This is a 20-year-old picture of the Cisco business ecosystem. Cisco used a network business model to achieve competitive advantage. And now with blockchain, we're going to see the rise of distributed value creation, where companies are going to start to look more like networks. And the future economy, the real economy, will be a more distributed economy. Now, that doesn't mean that companies won't be big. You can still have big companies, but they'll tend to have a different architecture. This is a change in the deep structures of the firm, of the architecture of the firm, of how we orchestrate capability in society to innovate, to create goods and services. Now, I'd like to use an example to make the point. In the book, Alex and I tried to develop a matrix of different business models. And in the bottom, we said, well, we have smart contracts, right? That's low automation and low complexity. Over here, high automation or autonomous agents. Artificial intelligence is not going to run on some supercomputer. It will be a number of autonomous agents that learn, machine learning agents functioning on a blockchain. And then the upper left, this is your company. This is Hyundai on a blockchain. It becomes an open networked organization, much more powerful. And we hypothesize, could you have a distributed autonomous enterprise that used all these technologies that had no CEO, no management, and no people? It was purely software running on a blockchain. And we spent some time trying to figure out how that would work. We almost didn't publish it because we thought this is too futuristic. But we did. A week after the book came out, an organization was launched, the DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization. And the DAO had no CEO, no management, and no people. It was a bunch of smart contracts and distributed application software on a blockchain, on Ethereum. The purpose of the DAO was to be a venture capital company and to raise funds to invest in this space. And the DAO held a crowdfunding campaign. It wasn't called an ICO because that word had not been invented yet, but that's what it was. And in 3 weeks, the DAO raised $164 million. Had no people. It's extraordinary. Now, it's not a happy ending for those of you who know the story. There was a flaw in the smart contract software that enabled a hacker to get in there and move $50 million into a different part of the DAO where after a 28-day period, the hacker could get it out. And this created a big crisis. And the hacker said, I'm not a hacker. I'm just abiding by the terms of the smart contract. Well, the end result was the creators of the DAO decided to give the money back to their investors. But there's a song in English by Bob Dylan called Mr. Jones, and it says, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. Imagine an extraordinary company that could have no people. So this is a time of very profound change. Now let me just, the theme is about the traditional economy. And I want to talk to you about some new business models. This has nothing to do with currencies or cryptocurrencies. It's new business models. So the first is what we call blockchain cooperatives. We have an opportunity to create a real sharing economy. Now you hear companies like Uber and Airbnb, people call them the sharing economy, right? Well, of course, they have nothing to do with sharing. They're successful precisely because they don't share. These companies are service aggregators. They're very good companies, but don't call them a sharing economy company. What if Uber or Airbnb were just a distributed application on a blockchain? So rather than Uber, we could call it Suber, Super Uber, or Airbnb, blockchain Airbnb. How would that work? Well, blockchain Airbnb, you check in, you find a place that you like. It's just a database, right? And blockchains are good at managing important information. It creates a smart contract. You show up, you open the door, you enjoy the nice apartment. When you open the door, a partial payment is made in the smart contract. And then when you leave, you shut the door, a full payment is made, and then you enter a 5-star rating. This is all immutable on a blockchain. There's no need for a company called Airbnb. All of this can be done through software. And the owners of rooms essentially would become a cooperative where there's true sharing occurring. The second is what we call rights creators. There are all these people in the economy that create value, but they're not fairly compensated for that value. The music industry is a great example. The Internet of Information broke our intellectual property regimes because we didn't have an Internet of value that could protect assets. So we used the Internet of Information and we published people's assets. We printed them. All of you sent MP3 files to your friends. And that made it very difficult for the creators of content. Do you know that if you wrote a song 35 years ago in the United States and it became a platinum song, 1 million singles, you would get $46,000 in revenue. Today, you write a song that sells 1 million singles or 1 million streams, you don't get $46,000, you get $35. That'll buy you some Korean beef. in Toronto, but it's not enough to live on for a year. So the poor musicians are left collecting crumbs. Well, what if we had a music industry based on blockchain? This is being built now by Imogen Heap, the British singer-songwriter, Grammy winner. And she's leading and creating a platform called Mycelium. And she's already posted a song on this platform. It's a blockchain. And the song is inside a smart contract. And the smart contract governs the use of the song. So you want to listen to the song? Maybe it's free, for a few microcents. You want to put the song in your movie? Well, that's a different thing. You want it to be the theme song? You want someone to sing it in your movie? That's different. You want it to be a ringtone on someone's phone in the movie? That's different. The way she describes it is my song is a business. And my song is out there protecting my rights and collecting my royalties. This is an extraordinary thing. Because it's not just musicians, it's scientists and journalists and artists and all kinds of people who could benefit from this economy. Number 3, you remember the term disintermediation. I used to talk about this in the 1980s. Well, there's an opportunity now to re-intermediate. If you're in the middle, you can go away. But there are new opportunities to create new value in the middle. The trouble is, the leaders of the old middle are typically not the ones to create the new value. Do you know what the biggest flow of funds from the developed world to the developing world is? It's not foreign aid. It's not even corporate investment. It's remittances. You know this term? The global diaspora, they've left their ancestral lands and they send money back home. This is upwards of $1 trillion. It's 15% of the Filipino economy. So in Toronto, there's a housekeeper named Annalie Domingo. And for 20 years, she gets on the bus and then the subway, and she goes to the bank, she cashes her check. Then she gets back on the bus and she goes to the Filipino Mall in Toronto, where there's a Western Union office specializing in the Filipino diaspora. She sends $500 to her mom in Manila every month. It takes 4 to 7 days to arrive, and she gets charged about 10% for doing that, $50. Well, over a year ago, Annalie Domingo used a tool on a blockchain. At the time it was called Abra, but there are interesting new ones now, like Paycase. And she sent that $500 from her mobile device to her mother's mobile device with no Western Union in the middle. It didn't take 7 days, it arrived instantly. And then she looks at her mobile and there are cars driving around, like Uber. They're called tellers. She sees a 5-star teller. He's 7 minutes away. She clicks on him. A guy shows up, knocks on her door, and gives her Filipino pesos that she sticks in her purse. The whole thing costs 1.5%. So companies like Paycase are re-intermediators, whereas Western Union in this scenario is being disintermediated. Are you in the middle? If you are, broker, consultant, lawyer, agent, intermediary of any kind, you need to think and rethink what is the value that you create. Number 4, supply chain around the world is a $64 trillion industry. $64 trillion. And all of that over time will move on to blockchain. Because supply chains are all about different parties doing transactions, trusting each other, and needing to know the whereabouts of things and the provenance of goods. Think about something like the trade finance that works on a blockchain. You've got a seller and a buyer that's got to move across the world. Then you have shippers and airlines, you have escrow agents, you have various brokers, you have governments. Imagine if they can all see a shared network state rather than sending faxes and messages to each other and so on. I think you can expect the big courier companies like FedEx and UPS to embrace blockchain as well. Now, one of the most extraordinary companies in this space, and do look it up, is called SweetBridge. And SweetBridge is attempting to completely reinvent this whole $64 trillion industry. And with SweetBridge, you can do things like, even though you don't have the money to pay your supplier yet, you can pay them now by monetizing your own supply chain. And that's one of a dozen things that SweetBridge can do that I think will have a huge impact. And I'm very excited about this company. Walmart is using blockchain for food safety, to know how food moves through the supply chain. If there's a problem, you can trace it right back to know what garden that tomato was grown in, or who are the parents of that cow for which there was a problem. The biggest supply chain in the world probably is Foxconn in Shenzhen, and we just did a big case study on them, embracing supply chain as well. Do you know the problem of conflict diamonds? That in Africa, tribal wars have been using diamonds to fund all kinds of our tribes have been using diamonds to fund all kinds of wars, and criminals have been using them and so on. This is pretty much under control now because of a blockchain-based platform called Everledger. Number 5, the physical world is becoming smart. Billions and trillions of inert objects that become smart communicating devices. My hotel room here has a chip in the door, and it's interconnected. The door has an IP address, and the door has knowledge. I had a camera stolen from a hotel room in Miami. This is 10 years ago. And the door knew about me. It knew who'd been in and out of the room. Actually, I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address. So all of these things talk to each other. I have no idea what his refrigerator says to his toaster, but apparently they have a meaningful conversation. He was actually bragging to me that his fence around his house communicates with his sprinkler system. And I'm like, well, why would you care? And he says, well, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense. We'll just let the translation on that one go through. So the Internet of Things is going to need a ledger of things. When that light bulb buys some power from a distributed power grid, because the power grid is going to become decentralized, and one of the sources of power might be the solar panel on your roof, and a market is created, probably by somebody like NASDAQ, the stock market company that's now entered into this space. That light bulb buys some power, and when it pays for the power, its reputation is enhanced, because every device has an identity on a blockchain. And that means that the NASDAQ power grid will sell power to that light bulb because it's a trustworthy light bulb that pays for power. Now, these kinds of transactions are not going to go through the Visa network, I can tell you that. we're going to need a distributed ledger for that to occur. So the old centralized model of everything is moving more towards a distributed model. And this is the Brooklyn microgrid, the story in the book about this. But this exists today. It's not in the future. This is a blockchain-based microgrid of people in Brooklyn, outside of New York, who have solar panels on their roof, and they sell power to each other on the network. Number 6, the platform builders. Let's start with the financial industry. You ever seen one of these weird things? They're called a Rube Goldberg machine. This guy, Rube Goldberg, was an inventor. And he invented all kinds of ridiculously complicated machines that would do a simple thing like crack an egg or open a door. Isn't that kind of like the financial industry? I look at that, I see a bank. Think about it. You tap your card in Starbucks, and a bunch of messages go through 6 different companies, each with their own computer systems. And then 3 days later, the messages go back, and a clearing and settlement occurs. Well, if that were based on a blockchain, there would be no 3-day settlement period. The payment and the settlement would be the same activity. It would just be a simple change in the ledger. There would be no counterparty risk for each of those companies. There would be no cost for each of those companies. There would be no delay for each of those companies. So the financial industry is working to build new platforms, a new payment system, for example. Now, these are the 8 things that the industry does. And it's a complicated industry, but these 8 things, this is really Alex Tapscott that came up with this elegant model. The industry is pretty simple. It authenticates and attests to value. You are who you are. That is actually a stock. It transfers value, it moves money, moves stocks, and so on. It stores value. It used to be in big safes, but now in computer systems. They lend value, all the debt instruments and so on. Exchange value, moving transactions, stock markets, and so on. They fund and invest value, venture capital, early stage capital, mutual funds, hedge funds, and so on, private equity. They insure value and manage risk, and they account for and audit for value. In theory, every one of these can be eliminated by a blockchain. Now that won't happen because the banks are working hard to build new platforms for each of these. But big changes are in the wind. Just look at something like fund and invest value. In the book, we said venture capital will be unrecognizable in 5 years. We were wrong. Last year, more money was raised in crowdfunding, ICOs, than all venture capital in the world. $3 billion went into innovation, raised through a whole new model outside of the boundaries of traditional venture capitalists. Audit value. The big auditing companies know that that part of their business will disappear, or at least change radically. You won't need an audit for your public company at the end of the year, because with triple entry accounting, you get real-time auditing. So these are big changes. Stock markets can become peer-to-peer. I've seen a demonstration of the New York Stock Exchange built by a single programmer one weekend on Ethereum. So the traditional institutions need to figure out how to change. And they're all, this is Jibrel, it's our host here today. There are all these new tools and capabilities that are starting to appear that are extraordinarily powerful. Like imagine if, for example, we can have tokens that we know who the token holder is. That can be a big improvement in making this environment more transparent and also in reducing any kind of fraudulent activity. Jibrel with a J wallet, J cash. That's a really exciting opportunity. Imagine if in smart contracts we can have liquidity very easily with fiat currencies. Then anyone can use a smart contract, and smart contracts can be used for anything from the music industry, where your song is inside a smart contract, to a vote. Why couldn't you have a smart vote that's part of a smart contract? Jibrel search. You know, I talked to some executives at Google a few years ago, and I said, Google created the search engine for the Internet of Information. Who will do that for the Internet of Value? And I argued to them, you should do it. Well, they're not, because leaders of old paradigms have difficulty embracing the new. So these are all kinds of exciting new opportunities. But for these to occur, we need sensible government leadership and regulation. During the first era of the Internet, I said to government regulators, just leave it alone. For the second era, we're talking about things of value, for which there is a public interest, assets, like money, or stocks, our identities, votes. So it's sensible to have some government regulation. But the regulation needs to be smart. 100 years ago in England, when the automobile was starting to appear, the government regulated, and it passed what was called the Red Flag Law. And the Red Flag Law said, if you have an automobile, you need to have a driver, a navigator, and you also need to have someone walking in front of the vehicle with a red flag so that you wouldn't frighten the horses. That law hurt the development of the automobile industry in the UK. There was no red flag law in the United States. So every country today is faced with a red flag moment. Will you have sensible regulation that protects the public interest, but also ensures that this huge new force for innovation and prosperity and wealth can grow? Or will you come down with a hammer, with a sledgehammer? Will you try and perform surgery with a chainsaw? And every country around the world is faced with these critical opportunities. The most sensible approach that I've seen today is in the United States. The Securities Exchange Commission, which is notorious for fiercely protecting the rights of shareholders, has come up with legislation around the issue of ICOs. And they've said if the token represents a share in a company, that's a security, and it should fall under securities legislation. Sensible. If the token represents something else, like a carbon credit or a loyalty point or a currency, or the case of Sweetbridge, a monetization of a supply chain, or the thousands of other things that tokens can represent, those are not securities, and they should be left to an open market. And the SEC feels comfortable that this is a good framework. Well, what do you do about criminals that might have an ICO? We already have laws for fraud. If you commit fraud, that's a criminal offense. We don't need new laws. Criminals are always the first to use new technology innovations anyway, from the automobile to the cell phone. So there are all kinds of new platforms that are emerging. And these are the new platforms to create an innovation economy and to build new models of the enterprise. So work with Hyperledger, work with Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, work with these new platforms to move forward. Block, creating exciting new platforms. We have Consensus Systems, a company that's got 45 different application projects underway today. Any one of them would completely revolutionize an industry. These are the new platform builders for the next century. Okay, we're almost done here. The next one is about data. I think big data is about to be turned on its head. Let me use an analogy. You know the word fracking? Fracking is a term in oil and gas where you drive steam into the ground and it forces the oil or gas out. It's like horizontal mining. Well, today we have the equivalent in data. Call them data frackers. Companies like Facebook that essentially are capturing this new oil, this new asset class called data. And this new asset class may turn out to be more important than previous asset classes like land in the agrarian economy or oil or industrial plant under the industrial age. But the problem is that you create this data, but they get to own it. It's sort of like back in the old days in countries like Korea, we had a feudal system before there was capitalism. And you worked the land, you built all this value, you grew vegetables or something, and then you had to give it all away to the landlord. You got to keep just a little bit. Well, we leave this trail of digital crumbs as we go through life, but we only get to keep a little bit. That means that we can't use that data to plan our lives. We can't monetize the data. And our privacy is being undermined. Now I get into debates. People say, come on, privacy is dead. Get over it. I think that attitude is foolish. Privacy is the foundation of freedom. And our identity consists of all of this data that we need to get it back so that we can manage it responsibly, monetize it, and use it to plan our lives. The virtual you knows more about you than you do. You need to get that back. So where we're going is a new identity on a blockchain. How exciting if the government of Korea were a leader in creating this new blockchain identity. The identity consists of all of your data, your transactional exhaust that you leave behind, but also your healthcare data and your educational data, right down to micro credentials. Not just what did you get on Biology 202, what did your professor say about your fourth lab in Biology 202, but it could contain all your other data. It's private and it's secure and you own it and you control it. But it's valid data, it's been attested to, and it's on a blockchain, so nobody can mess with it. Unless you can turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. So, what an exciting opportunity this would be, and how transformative it would be for every citizen and for every institution as well. And the final one is that there are some exciting opportunities to transform government and democracy. Let me describe those. The first is we can have better government at a lower cost. Because with blockchain, governments can become a platform whereby the private sector, civil societies, and others can co-innovate value. So Dubai wants to be the first government running fully on a blockchain. The government of Estonia years ago, moved towards a new citizen identity based on a blockchain. So I know there's some government people here. One of the most important things governments can do is to be a model user of the technology yourselves. Then we have amazing new developments that deliver government services, but they're not coming from governments. So Viridium is building a natural capital marketplace for things like carbon credits or environmental credits. And they're partnering with a company called CarbonX, where every one of you will be able to collect tokens that represent a carbon credit. And when Hyundai sells you a car, that car will be carbon neutral because it will become bundled with a number of these CarbonX tokens. So the idea is if a company can benefit by being green, why can't a family or an individual? And in our wallets, we'll have money, but we'll also have carbon credits that we'll be able to trade or turn into fiat currencies if we want. Number two, our democratic institutions are in deep trouble all around the world. Look at America. America's trust in government from 1958 to 2017. We have an emerging crisis of legitimacy of our democratic institutions. There's a polarization of left and right. There's growing social unrest and instability. And we have a president of the United States who says that democracy is not a good system, that it's rigged, and that there's massive voter fraud. So no wonder young people agree with that bumper sticker, "Don't vote, it only encourages them." Now this is a problem because democracy is the best system that we have. But young people, youth voting has been declining for a decade. How are we going to fix this problem? Seymour Martin Lipset, the great political scientist, said, "Legitimacy is the capacity of a political system to engender and maintain the belief that existing political institutions are the most appropriate." So you may disagree with who's in the government, but at least you think the system is a good one. This is now being questioned. And the alternatives to democracy are not good around the world. With blockchain, we could move to a second wave of democracy. The first, we created these representative institutions, but there was a weak public mandate, and citizens were inert. We could move to a second era that's based on accountability, and that's based on a culture of public deliberation and active citizenship. Now, I don't have time to go through these, but these are just some of the examples. We could have e-voting. E-voting will never work with traditional computing technology because you need to know when you vote that that vote cannot be double spent. The double spend problem, right? You need to know that your vote is counted for the person for whom you voted and it can't be moved. Only blockchain can deliver the trust for e-voting. But on all kinds of other ways, imagine a smart contract where when you vote, that's part of a contract that forces your representative to be accountable to you rather than to the big money that put them into power. So this is such an exciting time. We can rebuild democracy for a whole new era. And the final one is reinventing the central banks. After this session today, I'm going to China, and then I'm going to Davos, the World Economic Forum. And last year, I had a meeting, a private meeting with all of the central bankers and all of the ministers of finance in the world, where we discussed the opportunities to use this technology. The currency, the fiat currency of Korea, should move onto a blockchain. Forget about Bitcoin. You need a blockchain-based fiat currency, and that would deliver powerful tools to a central banker to manage the money supply, to have better transparency, and to have a lighter touch on regulation. So, these are some big changes to government. Add them all up. This is a time of profound opportunity. 8 new business models. There are dozens of them, but I have time today to talk about 8 of them. This is not some different blockchain economy. This is the real economy that's being transformed by this technology. Now, how do we get from here to there? Well, there are lots of impediments. We have legacy attitudes and cultures. Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan, said Bitcoin is a fraud. When he said that, I went and looked up some of the other famous statements that people have come to regret. Do you remember Ken Olsen, the CEO of Digital Equipment Corporation, the biggest computer company in the world after IBM? And he said, why would anyone want a personal computer in their home? We call this in English, the expression is famous last words. Well, Jamie Dimon has now withdrawn that statement, but it's reflective of the fact that it takes people time to understand what's going on here. And there's a reason for that. This is a new paradigm. The blockchain revolution is a new paradigm. Paradigm is a mental model. They put boundaries around what we think. They constrain our actions. They're often based on assumptions that are so strong, we don't know that they're there. The earth is at the center of the universe. That was a paradigm for thousands of years. The big problem in the world is communism. Well, it's still a problem in this part of the world, but for most of the world, that's not the big problem. The purpose of computing is to automate existing business processes. That's what we thought computers were for. Then they became a communications tool. Well, something can happen in art, science, culture, technology that breaks that paradigm. And that's what's happening today. And when you get a paradigm shift, these things are often received with coolness, or worse, mockery, hostility. Vested interests fight against change, and leaders of old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new paradigm. Do you know the leaders of Newtonian physics had a terrible time embracing Einstein's general theory of relativity because it broke down their mental model. How is your company going to find leadership? How is Korea going to find leadership for change? Well, we've studied thousands of organizations, and I work with government leaders. Do you know where leadership comes from? It can come from anywhere. We documented a story of a clerical secretary who was the key person of a transformation of a division of one of the biggest banks in the world. And she had what it took to be a leader. She just willed it. Leadership is about leadership for learning. Because the person at the top, the head of state, the CEO of a big company, as smart as they are, they can't learn for the society as a whole. Which is why leadership is your opportunity, if you will it. And when I travel around, the number one thing that I'm looking for in a leader is curiosity. A new paradigm that enables trust to be achieved through cryptography? How do you react to that? You say, no way. Or do you say, I'm curious, tell me more. So this is a time, as I said, of promise and of peril. And how's it going to shape out in Korea? which way will you go? Well, my view is that the future is not something to be predicted. The future is something to be achieved. And you people in this room have self-selected as being part of the positive future for this country. And I hope that you'll keep it up. Let me close with an analogy. And if we could turn the volume down, way down, please. Thank you. Alex and I have been studying nature to try and understand this trust protocol. Fish come in schools, birds come in flocks, bees come in swarms, starlings come in something called a murmuration. It's an English word, it's in the dictionary, murmuration. And it refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And starlings are out over a 20-mile radius foraging for food, and at night they come together and they create one of the most spectacular things in nature. The murmuration has a function. Look up here. That's a hawk, a predator, a killer of starlings being chased away by the collective power of the little bird. Scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. There's leadership, but there's no one leader. And when the moment is right, magic happens. Now, is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or could we learn something from it? This is the trust protocol in nature. And we can apply this to humans. It functions according to the principles I've been sharing with you. It's a massive collaboration. Remember I said trust is not achieved by intermediaries. There's no intermediary there. It's achieved by cryptography and by code in the DNA of the birds. The thing has a great interdependence. You know, the volume down a bit, please. As I travel around, I say to business leaders, business can't succeed in a world that's failing. I say to government leaders, no country can succeed in a world that's failing. And this murmuration functions as if the interests of the individual bird are attached to the interests of the murmuration as a whole. Interdependence. And overall, it has a great integrity that gives the birds the courage to take on a fierce predator. And that's what trust is all about. What is trust? What is trust? To me, trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity. Trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity, that they will do the right thing, that they'll be honest, that they'll be considerate of your interests, and that they'll abide by their commitments. And it's that integrity that gives the bird the courage to take on a predator 25 times its size, because it knows that the other birds will do the right thing. Imagine if we could connect ourselves in this country or in this planet with some kind of new trust protocol, some new platform for innovation and for creating and sharing wealth and solving the big problems of our epoch. Surely this new age of distributed trust could be an age where the promise is fulfilled. And maybe this smaller world that your children inherit might actually be a better one. Thank you very much. Thank you.
네, 정말 감동적인 강연이었습니다. 다시 한번 돈테스코 회장님께 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 이것으로 블록체인 혁명의 모든 세션과 강연이 마무리가 돼가고 있는데요. 예, 마지막으로 지브렐 네트워크의 공동 창업자 세 분을 모시겠습니다. 야잔 바르쿠티님, 탈랄 타바님, 빅터 메즐리님을 모시고요. 포럼을 마무리 짓는 시간을 가져보도록 하겠습니다. 세 분 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
That was incredible. I'm sure you share my opinion. And I'm sure a lot of you found that incredibly insightful. I'm sure I did. Before we wrap things up, I'd just like to introduce possibly the favorite person I've met in the last 10 years, and our CTO, Victor Mezrin, who'll wrap things up for us.
Hello. Last 6 hours we talked about blockchain, technology, past years, future. And right now I just want to set several notes about our industry. What's going to happen? You know, blockchain is a young technology. First Bitcoin block appeared 9 years ago. First Ethereum block appeared 3 years ago. First Neo block appeared 1.5 years ago. And this is very young, evolving, promising technology. What we engineers did in the last 10 years? We made code, we made tests, we built smart contracts. We argued about consensus mechanisms, and we worried about transaction propagation and transaction fees. We tried to explain to our friends what is blockchain, and we tried to explain the same to investors, to officials. And that was actually early experiments with the blockchain. And I personally believe that we are very close to the end of this stage. Very, very soon, blockchain will become something different, something more complex. But what's the biggest difference between the blockchain and other big technologies that people built in the past century? Aircrafts, internet, computers, mobile phones. What's the biggest difference between blockchain and this? All other technologies serve people. They serve ordinary people. And this is what's going blockchain to do in the next years. Very, very soon, here on this pad, in this conference hall, we will speak about user base, user satisfaction, profits, revenue. We will estimate how a particular crypto solution changes the world. And this will require a big shift in our mind, in our approaches to solve problems. This will be tremendous changes, believe me. And you know, we, Jibrel team, is going to ride this wave with support of you, together with you. Thank you for your support. We appreciate it very, very much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So it's actually an honor speaking after Don Tapscott. Victor, I'm going to keep this very short and very sweet. I just want to thank you all for coming tonight, for your support throughout. Jibrel Network are honored to have you all as guests. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
네, 세 분의 말씀처럼 이 시대의 새로운 끝이 도달했다. 블록체인의 새로운 모습을 기대가 됩니다. 이제 모든 행사를 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 정말 장시간 동안 이 모든 포럼에서 강연을 해주신 분, 또 강연을 들어주신 모든 분께 감사의 인사를 드리겠습니다. 저희가 자그마한 기념품을 준비했습니다. 나가시는 길에서 이 목에 걸고 계신 비표 반납하시면서 선물 받아가시기 바랍니다. 그럼 지금까지 블록체인 혁명 포럼 아나운서 김나리였습니다. 고맙습니다.